Connecticut landlord won his eviction case after the judge decided that bad luck isn't a reasonable defense for tenants to not pay rent. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over this eviction case in Connecticut. Now, obviously, one little small specific eviction case isn't something that, makes a lot of national news, but I think that it's a really interesting topic because it really points out the fact that, hey, in most cases, we have tenants who, sometimes they have bad circumstances, but just because something happens to the tenant that's bad luck doesn't mean that the landlord should have to suffer because of those circumstances. So in this case, the tenants, they had a series of bad events in their lives, right? But the landlord was going to possibly just lose thousands and thousands of dollars the longer those tenants stayed in the property. While that is, bad that we have to, push people out, the landlord, it's not their responsibility to make sure that a tenant is taken care of after having a hard time, okay? We're not social service providers, we're not welfare providers, and we shouldn't be forced to be homeless shelters either for people who can't afford housing. So, yeah, I think in this case, the judge made the correct decision, sided with the landlord, and, I'm going to point out that, these tenants, regardless of what they told the judge, they seem to be full of crap, okay? They seem to be full of crap, and the judge saw through their story, and, for the tenants watching my videos, they need to understand that, hey, just because you lost your job or just because, you had some emergency other bills come up, doesn't take away your responsibility to pay your rent, okay? And us landlords, we already knew this, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you believe that it is the landlord's responsibility to pay the rent essentially for people who have gone through bad times? Maybe they ended up in the hospital with some kind of illness or injury. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe, somebody passed away. Do you think that's the landlord's fault? Do you think the landlord should just have to take that rental loss while they figure out what's going on in their lives? And how long should we give them? Huh? How long? Should it be 6 months? Should it be a year? I don't think so, okay? The rental laws, the eviction laws were written a certain way because that is all the time that is necessary. And in this case in particular, in this article, this landlord actually gave the tenants way more time than necessary, okay? Way more time, and they still couldn't get their stuff together. So anyway, let's get into this article, okay? This article is coming from the New Haven Independent, and it says, "Eviction okayed after lapse. Rent debate." And this New Haven Independent actually has a couple of great articles on, going through evictions that are happening in New Haven, Connecticut. And I've read other articles on my videos from this newspaper. Now, obviously a lot of them, they have the pro-tenant, anti-landlord slant to them, but, I find them to be overall fair to the landlords involved in the story, and especially in this story with the small landlord, so I will be reading the parts that are the most important and skipping over a lot of the fluff. So anyway, let's get into it. A state judge has ordered a Blake Street family of renters to leave their apartment by the end of the month, siding with a small local landlord desperate to take back possession of an apartment he hasn't collected rent on in roughly half a year, and leaving a hardship beset tenant to scramble to find a new place to live for her and her kids. State Superior Court Judge Walter Spader Jr. issued that ruling Tuesday morning at the end of an eviction trial held in New Haven's housing court on the third floor of the state courthouse at 121 Elm Street. The eviction order marked the culmination of months of frustrations and challenges on both sides in a case that dates back to September. The case pitted a retired former accountant who has owned and managed a handful of local rental properties for over 4 decades against a family of tenants who hit one medical and financial problem after another and who stopped paying the $800 monthly rent for their one-bedroom apartment as the legal matter made its way through court. So yeah, the owner of this property is, the epitome of the small landlord. Local to the area, owns just a few properties, and they have a tenant in the property who stopped paying rent back in September. So it's been 6 months, almost 6 months since all of this started. Actually, it's been longer than that because the landlord didn't actually file the eviction until September. The tenants stopped paying them before that, and that's something they're going to get into here in just a moment in this article. I just want the property back, the landlord, East Haven resident William Wong, told the judge again and again during Tuesday's trial. I just can't afford this anymore. The tenant, who asked not to be named for this story, as she looks to find a new place for her and her kids and her husband to live, asked the judge to give her until the end of March to move out. My family cannot afford a security deposit to move right now, she said during the trial. We had a number of difficulties over the past year. I'm trying to do the best that I can. The judge ultimately sided with the landlord. He granted Wong's requested lapse of time eviction on the grounds that the tenant's lease had expired and she no longer had the right to occupy the apartment. He then ordered the tenants to leave their third floor Blake Street rental by January 31st. Yeah, and see, that's another trick that a lot of these tenants will do, right? So basically, I just need a little bit more time, a little bit more time. Well, you know what? This has been going on since September. They haven't been able to pay the rent, and the eviction was filed back in September. So we got September, October, November, December, January, and the landlord says you got to be out by January 31st, right? And you're like, well, I need till the end of March. You need 2 more months? I mean, come on, you haven't paid rent in, 6 months. So shouldn't you have theoretically, since you haven't been paying the $800 a month rent, you should have theoretically been able to pay or save up for your security deposit. And you need 2 more months. That's ridiculous. You're sitting here saying, "Oh, we need to save some money for the." Listen, you're just dragging this out. You're trying to make things worse. You're making this worse for the landlord. Okay. Tuesday's eviction judgment came down against the backdrop of a sharp statewide increase in eviction lawsuits, as many of Connecticut's pandemic-era renter protections and relief programs expired, and as renters reeled from a pandemic-induced medical, economic, and mental health challenges. By far, the busiest filer of local eviction lawsuits last year was mega landlord Mandy Management. So at this point in the article, they actually have a copy of the letter that this tenant, the filing that the tenant made, right? It's just a handwritten letter, I guess, to the courts, right? I'll read that right now, and I'll put that up on the screen. Immediately, we agreed to do so and told him we would need a few months. Only a few days later, my newborn fell and broke her skull and spent nearly a week in the hospital. Where my oldest child could not even visit, let alone stay. So in result, my spouse lost his job. Then our family was in a car accident, totaling our vehicle, so we had to get another, in turn causing us to keep having to use the money we were saving to move. We then discussed with Mr. Wong that he would use the security deposit for the 2 months rent so that we can still quickly save up to move. Yeah, so that was kind of hard to read, not written very well, but from the gist of it, it sounds like their child fell, fractured. There was a skull fracture involved and was in the hospital. Very unfortunate event, okay? And for some reason, probably, he was spending, the child's father was spending time at the hospital checking on his kid, and he ended up losing his job because of it. So, some of this is, just, acts of, just things happening, okay? Things happening, and they're unfortunate. I hate to hear about a child getting hurt and injured, and that's unfortunate. However, when her husband lost his job, that is something that is under their control. So he needed to be going to work, especially since they have rent to be paid. And maybe he can go to the hospital and check on his child after work or before work, but if they need to pay their bills, see, the problem is, instead of using that sort of logic, they were like, okay, well, we'll just lose our housing. And like, well, that won't make anything better for your child if you don't have somewhere to live. Okay? So he should have been going to work. And he didn't. He ended up losing his job because of it. So some of this is caused by their own actions. Now, I'm not saying that, I wanted this child to get injured or that I don't sympathize with them for having an injured child. What I am saying is that these things are not the landlord's fault. Okay? They are not the landlord's fault. The landlord still has to continue to pay their bills regardless of what happens to them. You think Mr. Wong, their landlord, he probably has a lot of stuff going on in his life too. And it's not right that you are going to put your burden onto him. And that's exactly what many tenants want to do. They want to put their burden onto the landlord. Their burden of, hey, we lost our job, so therefore you have to suffer, landlord. No. You figure it out. That's your problem, and you need to go if you can't afford to live here. So I'm going to skip down a little bit in this article because there's more information. It's a very, very long and very detailed article. I'm actually kind of surprised because they normally don't write such a long, detailed article about eviction cases like this. The tenant told the judge that she already has 2 children and is pregnant with a third. She said her husband was finally got a steady job after a stint of unemployment. She said that she only stopped paying rent because she didn't understand what her legal rental obligations were as the eviction proceedings stretched on in court. And she said that she has proposed a back rent catch-up plan to the landlord that would see her pay him $400 per week to make up for the $2,400 in rent she owes from September, October, and November. Our difficulties are not his fault, the tenant said about the series of medical and health issues that hurt her family's finances. She said that before this eviction matter, we never had any issues with the landlord. I'm just asking for a couple more months, ideally until the end of March, after her family gets their federal tax refund, to find a new apartment for her family. The monthly rent for this apartment is $800, the judge asked Wong. That's right, the landlord replied, but this is not even about the rent. I just want my apartment back. If the judge gives the tenants until the end of March, and if their tax refund is delayed, he said, then the tenants will likely ask for more time until they have to move out. He repeated that he first told the tenants they had to go in July, and then began the formal eviction proceedings in September. While he said he hasn't received rent since July, even if that month is contested, that's still 6 months worth of rent starting in August that he has not been paid. I think they've had more than enough time to find a new apartment, he said. I think they can afford a new apartment. So yeah, like he said, he didn't actually file eviction on them until September, right? But he asked them to leave in July. So they haven't been paying rent since July. And even if they don't include July, that's 6 months that they owe him, right? And all of a sudden the tenant is saying, oh, well, we're going to pay, my husband was finally able to find a job and now we're going to pay $400 a week to make up the back rent if you just give us a little bit extra time. But the judge didn't want to do that. And I'm glad that the judge didn't, because simply put, who knows if they're telling the truth on the amount that they're actually going to be able to pay, or if they're going to be able to even pay this back rent that's owed. I don't think so. Honestly, I believe that, they're just blowing smoke up everyone's butts so that they can get 2 extra free months of rent. Okay, and they're not going to pay a dime. If the tenant can afford to pay $400 a week as part of the proposed rent catch-up plan that the landlord appears to have turned down, Spader concluded, then the tenant can likely afford the costs of finding and moving to a new apartment. With that, he granted the lapse of time eviction with a final stay of January 31st. Yep, and he's right. If the tenant can actually pay that amount, that extra $400 a week in order to make the catch up, then they should have no problem coming up with a security deposit and paying rent at a different place. They should be able to come up with the moving costs as well. So, they kind of screwed themselves over by trying to tell a lie to get extra time, because that actually strengthened the landlord's case, and now they got to get the heck out of there. So, yeah, I'm glad that this landlord is able to get his unit back. I'm glad that these tenants who, I personally believe that, there's a lot of lying, a lot of scamming going on. Who knows if all of what they said is true or not. You know, if their child was actually hospitalized, or if, you know, lost a job. None of that even matters. Okay, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters when we're talking about a lease transaction is, are you going to pay the money that you owe or not? That's it. Okay, and if you can't pay it, then you got to go. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe.